When you look at a Lego instruction sheet and your brain instantly figures out how the pieces connect, that flash of insight happens in a fraction of a second without you consciously rehearsing every combination. Today's paper asks, what exactly is the brain doing during those milliseconds, and which neural events are pulling the strings?
That's a great hook. I definitely feel like my brain just gets it without manually working through every possibility.
And a team led by Yunj Liu at Beijing Normal University has now recorded directly from inside the living human brain to catch that process in real time, finding that tiny electrical bursts in the hippocampus are actively rewriting the planning code of the prefrontal cortex.
Before we get into what they found, can you set the scene? What's the big scientific puzzle here?
Sure, the brain has a remarkable ability that researchers call compositional inference, the capacity to take a handful of familiar pieces and combine them into completely new structures. It's sometimes described as the infinite use of finite means. Language works this way: you know a limited set of words and rules, and from them you can produce sentences you've never heard before.
Right, it's not like we store a separate memory for every possible sentence we'll ever say.
Exactly, and the same principle applies to planning, problem-solving, and abstract reasoning. Two brain regions have long been linked to this kind of flexible thinking: the hippocampus, the seahorse-shaped structure deep in the brain famously associated with memory, and the medial prefrontal cortex, which sits at the front of the brain and is known for representing abstract relationships and schemas, meaning organized frameworks of knowledge.
So both regions are already suspects. What wasn't known?
The mechanism of how they talk to each other in real time. Most prior work used brain imaging techniques like fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, which tracks blood flow as a proxy for neural activity, or MEG, which detects the brain's magnetic fields. Both are powerful, but fMRI is too slow to catch events that last only a fraction of a second, and MEG can't pinpoint exactly where in the brain something is happening.
So it's like trying to read a text message during a lightning storm. You know something happened, but you can't make out the details.
That's a great analogy, and this is precisely the gap the new study set out to close. The candidate mechanism they wanted to test is something called hippocampal ripples, brief, synchronous bursts of high-frequency electrical activity in the hippocampus that typically last less than 0.2 of a second. They are strongly associated with a phenomenon called replay.
What is replay exactly?
Replay is when the brain internally reactivates a rapid sequence of previously learned states, almost like pressing fast forward on a memory. Think of it as the brain running a quick mental simulation. If piece A connects to piece B and piece B connects to piece C, what does A to C look like? The hypothesis was that ripples trigger these simulations to help the brain solve novel problems on the fly.
So the big idea is that ripples might trigger the prefrontal cortex to update its picture of how things relate to each other.
Precisely, and there's an important distinction the paper draws between two types of neural representation. The first is perceptual representation, the brain simply registering which pieces are present, like noting there's a red block and a blue block. The second is compositional representation, which encodes not just what's there, but how the pieces relate to each other. The red block is on top of the blue block is a compositional representation.
Wait, so it's kind of like the difference between a parts list and an assembly diagram.
That's a perfect analogy. A parts list just says what you have. An assembly diagram tells you how everything connects. A subregion at the top of the medial prefrontal cortex, called the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex, or DMPFC, is the brain's assembly diagram generator.
And the hypothesis is that ripples from the hippocampus write that assembly diagram into the prefrontal cortex.
That's the core claim. The theoretical background is compelling. Recent computational models suggested that ripple events could rapidly reorganize cortical activity patterns without requiring any change in the strength of synaptic connections, the physical links between neurons. So it would be a fast, temporary update, like editing a shared document in real time rather than rewriting it from scratch overnight.
That sounds almost too convenient, like the brain has a built-in update now button.
Sharp intuition. And that's precisely what makes this study important. They actually recorded this happening in real human brains during active thought.
How did they actually do this? You mentioned recording from inside the brain.
Yes, the participants were 28 patients with severe medication-resistant epilepsy, a condition where abnormal electrical discharges cause repeated seizures, who already had depth electrodes implanted as part of their clinical treatment planning. These are thin probes, each less than a millimeter in diameter, inserted directly into brain tissue to record electrical activity from specific regions simultaneously.
So the researchers were piggyback riding on a clinical procedure.
Exactly, the patients gave informed consent to participate in research alongside their clinical monitoring. This gave the team an extraordinary window, recording from 164 hippocampal contact points and nearly 2,000 cortical contacts at once, with millisecond precision. The neural signal they focused on was called high-frequency broadband power activity in the 80 to 140 Hz range, which is a well-established marker of local neuronal firing.
And what did participants actually do during the recordings?
There were two tasks, both designed like Lego construction puzzles. In the first, participants learned 9 building blocks, simple shapes, that could be stacked vertically or placed side by side to form various silhouettes. On each trial, they were shown a silhouette for 3.5 seconds and had to silently work out a construction plan in their heads, followed by a probe question.
So the brain has to do relational work, figuring out which block goes on top of which.
Right, and to probe compositional representation, the team used a technique they called silhouette algebra. Imagine combining 3 silhouettes like a math expression. Subtract the shared spatial relation, add a new one, and the result predicts a specific target silhouette. If the brain encodes the relational configuration and not just the pieces, the neural pattern for that combination should resemble the target more than a reference silhouette with pieces in the opposite arrangement.
Clever, you're testing whether the brain cares about how things are arranged, not just what's there.
Exactly. The second task was designed to catch replay in action directly. Participants worked with only 4 building blocks per silhouette. One block was always present in every silhouette, called the stable block, while 2 others had to be inferred. The researchers could then track which replay sequences the brain generated during planning.
And to detect replay, they first had to teach a computer what each block looks like in the brain's electrical signals.
Yes, a separate training session, called a functional localizer, showed each block repeatedly in isolation. This trained a neural decoder to recognize each block's signature in the cortical signals. Then, during actual planning, the team looked for rapid sequential reactivations of those signatures. A reactivation sequence that moved from one block representation to another within about 70 milliseconds. That's a replay event.
What did they actually find?
Let's go layer by layer. Behaviorally, participants improved over sessions, faster and more accurate, and harder compound silhouettes required more time, exactly as expected. That confirms the task was working.
Good baseline, then the neural results.
First major finding, the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex encoded compositional representation specifically during the middle to late stage of inference, roughly 2 seconds into that 3.5-second planning window. And critically, it encoded the relational configuration, not just which blocks were present. The visual cortex, used as a control region, showed no compositional encoding. It tracked low-level visual features, but didn't care about the relational structure.
So the prefrontal cortex is building the assembly diagram, and the visual cortex is just looking at the image.
Perfectly put. Second major finding, hippocampal ripple rate, how frequently ripples occurred per second during the planning phase, specifically predicted compositional representation. More ripples meant stronger relational encoding. And this was specific to ripple rate, measuring average neural activity in the hippocampus over the same period gave no such signal.
So it's not that the hippocampus is generally more active. It's these brief bursting events that matter.
Exactly. The ripples are doing something distinct from baseline activity. Third finding, and this is the key causal-looking link. When the team time-locked brain recordings to the moment of each ripple peak, the prefrontal cortex encoded the relational structure significantly more strongly in the quarter-second after the ripple than in the quarter-second before it. The visual cortex showed no such change. Perceptual representation, just tracking which blocks were present, also showed no change around ripples.
So the ripple is actually updating the prefrontal cortex's relational code, right then and there.
And in the second task, they confirmed the replay mechanism directly. Replay, the rapid sequential reactivation of building block representations, occurred predominantly during the peri-ripple period, the window around each ripple event. Sequences initiated from the inferred present blocks were strongly replayed during ripples and predicted faster, more accurate performance. Sequences starting from the always-known, stable block actually decreased in replay strength as participants became more familiar with the task.
That's a really clean result. The brain selectively simulates the uncertain parts of the problem, and once something is known, it stops bothering to rehearse it.
Exactly, and stronger peri-ripple replay predicted faster response times, whereas weaker or absent replay during non-ripple periods showed no such behavioral benefit.
Let me try to put the whole story together. Ripples fire in the hippocampus. That triggers replay of the relevant building block sequences in the cortex, and that replay updates the prefrontal cortex's relational map of the solution.
That's exactly the mechanistic story the data support. The team confirmed it using a mediation analysis, a statistical technique that tests whether one effect operates through another. Stronger replay during ripples led to stronger medial prefrontal cortex activity, which in turn led to faster responses. The visual cortex showed no such mediation pathway.
So the prefrontal cortex is the hub where replay gets translated into usable relational knowledge.
Right, and this extends how we think about hippocampal ripples. The classical view associates them with offline memory consolidation, the idea that during sleep, ripples help stamp memories from the hippocampus into long-term cortical storage. This study shows that ripples are also performing a faster online function, actively updating cortical representations during live reasoning.
It's like the difference between saving a file overnight versus editing a shared document in real time.
Great analogy. Now there's an interesting nuance the authors raise. While tight hippocampus to prefrontal coupling benefits inference tasks, other work suggests that excessively strong coupling can actually impede creative thinking. Creative problem-solving sometimes requires breaking away from established schemas. If the hippocampus keeps reinforcing the prefrontal cortex's familiar relational structures that could constrain genuinely novel combinations.
So ripples are powerful for working within known structures, but might limit you when you need to break the mold.
That tension is what the authors flag as a direction for future investigation. The brain presumably has ways to modulate this coupling, tightening it when efficient planning is needed, loosening it when creative leaps matter. As for limitations, the electrode placement was dictated by clinical necessity, not experimental design, leading to uneven coverage. Only 5 of the 21 subjects with simultaneous cortical and hippocampal recordings showed above-chance neural decoding of individual blocks, a relatively low proportion. Even so, the replay findings replicated key results from prior MEG studies, strengthening confidence in the conclusions. If I had to put today's biggest surprise in one sentence, hippocampal ripples are not just memory consolidation events that happen while you sleep. They are real-time update signals that fire during active thought, trigger rapid replay of relevant knowledge sequences, and rewrite the prefrontal cortex's relational map of whatever problem you're solving.
And all of that happens in under a quarter of a second, inside the mind of someone staring at a silhouette made of Lego-like blocks.
That's the finding that really changes the picture of how the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex cooperate. Today's episode was based on the paper Human Hippocampal Ripples, Coordinate Planning Sequences, and Compositional Representations in Neocortex by Lai He, Shengfei Wang, and colleagues, published in Nature Neuroscience in 2026. DOI 10 1035-S41593-026-02291-3.
Thank you. I'll never think about a flash of insight the same way again.
Thanks for listening to OSCI Pod.